Let's clear something up first. If this were a money problem, earning more would have fixed it. If this were a skill problem, learning more would have solved it. But people who are capable, educated, and hardworking still remain dependent on a paycheck for decades. That tells us something important. This isn't about income, it's about how the human brain responds to safety, fear, and uncertainty. And once you understand that, your situation stops feeling confusing. Psychology number one: the brain chooses certainty over freedom. Most people believe they want freedom, but what the human brain actually wants is certainty. Not because people are weak, unambitious, or afraid of responsibility, but because the brain evolved to keep you alive, not fulfilled. Certainty lowers threat. Predictability lowers anxiety. Routine calms the nervous system. And nothing provides that faster or more reliably than a paycheck. That's why paycheck dependency doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like relief. You don't tell yourself, I'm dependent. You tell yourself things that sound reasonable, even mature. At least I know what's coming in every month. I just need something stable for now. Once things are more secure, then I'll think about options. Now isn't the right time. Every one of these sentences prioritizes predictability over progress. Not because you don't want more, but because uncertainty triggers threat. When your nervous system senses uncertainty, it doesn't ask whether something is meaningful or aligned. It asks a simpler question: is this safe? A paycheck answers that question immediately. Freedom, on the other hand, doesn't come with guarantees. There's no fixed amount, no fixed timing, no external validation. And when you imagine life without that structure, your brain doesn't picture possibility. It jumps straight to worst case scenarios: missed payments, regret, embarrassment, having to explain yourself, being wrong. Even if none of those things actually happen, the brain treats uncertainty itself as danger. That tightening you feel in your chest when you think about leaving safety behind, that's not logic failing you. That's your nervous system doing its job. This is why intelligence doesn't protect people from being stuck, it often makes it worse. Smart people don't freeze, they justify. They tell themselves they're being responsible, realistic, patient, disciplined. And on the surface, it all sounds wise. But underneath is the same trait happening quietly: certainty in exchange for freedom. At first, it feels like a good deal. Your life stabilizes, your stress lowers, you become normal. You can plan, you can predict, you can relax. And month after month, when the paycheck arrives, your body learns something important. This is what safety feels like. Relief reinforced behavior. Over time, certainty becomes non negotiable. Anything that threatens it starts to feel reckless, irresponsible, or unrealistic, even if it's the very thing that could move your life forward. That's how people end up saying, I know I'm stuck, but I can't afford to risk it. Not because they truly can, but because their brain was never trained to tolerate uncertainty. And this is the first lock. Not money, not skill, not opportunity. Certainty. Until someone learns how to sit with uncertainty without panicking or retreating, every alternative path will feel like it's not for them. This is why paycheck dependency survives logic, because it isn't maintained by reason, it's maintained by the nervous system. Psychology number two: the fear of losing what you have is stronger than the desire for more. Here's a truth most people never confront. You don't stay dependent on a paycheck because you lack ambition. You stay because the fear of losing what you already have is stronger than the desire for what you could gain. Psychology has studied this for decades. Humans experience loss more intensely than gain. Losing something hurts far more than gaining the same thing feels good. But you don't need research to know this. You live it every day. When you think about changing your situation, your mind doesn't start with the upside. It doesn't picture freedom, flexibility, or ownership. It goes straight to loss. What if this doesn't work? What if I mess up? What if I fall behind? What if I regret it? What if I lose what I've built? Notice what's happening. You're not evaluating the future, you're protecting the present. Even if the present is unsatisfying, it's familiar. You know how to survive here, you know how to function here, You've already paid the cost of entry, so your brain treats what you have now as something that must not be endangered. This is why people say things like, I can't risk what I already have. I don't want to throw away years of effort. I've worked too hard to mess this up. Those statements sound rational, but emotionally, they reveal something deeper. Your brain is anchored to preservation, not progression. And the longer you stay in one structure, one job, one lifestyle, one identity, the heavier that anchor becomes. Your income isn't just money anymore. It represents years of effort, sacrifice, and proof that you made the right choices. Walking away doesn't feel like a decision, it feels like erasing your past. So instead of moving towards something better, you defend what already exists, even when it no longer serves you. This is how people end up upgrading everything except their direction. They chase promotions, raises, titles, and responsibilities not because those things lead to freedom, but because they protect them from loss. A slightly higher salary justifies staying. A new role makes leaving feel riskier. More responsibility turns exit into betrayal of the company, of others, of your own image as a reliable person. And slowly, what began as caution becomes confinement. The most dangerous part is that loss aversion doesn't feel like fear. It feels like wisdom. It disguises itself as maturity, patience, and discipline. You tell yourself you're being careful, not scared, but the result is the same. You avoid moves that could change your trajectory because the downside feels unbearable. This is why people can clearly see that their current path won't lead to the life they want and still stay on it. Not because they don't understand the math, but because emotionally, the pain of losing what's familiar outweighs the promise of something better. Paycheck dependency survives because it minimizes perceived loss. It doesn't give you everything, but it gives you enough to protect what you already have. And as long as the brain believes that leaving means losing, it will always choose staying. That's the second lock. Not laziness, not lack of ideas, but the fear of loss quietly outweighing the desire for growth. Psychology number three. The paycheck becomes your emotional safety. Here's something most people don't realize is happening. At some point, the paycheck stops being about money, it becomes about how you feel. You don't stay dependent on a paycheck just because it pays your bills. You stay because it regulates your emotions. Psychology shows that humans seek ways to reduce anxiety and uncertainty. But again, you don't need research to see this. You live it every month. When the paycheck comes in, something changes. Your shoulders relax, your breathing slows, the background stress quiets down. Not because your life suddenly improved, but because uncertainty temporarily disappeared. When you imagine not having that certainty, your mind doesn't jump to possibility, it goes straight to emotional discomfort. What if I'm not okay? What if I can't sleep at night? What if the stress never stops? What if I feel out of control? Notice the language. You're not afraid of earning less, you're afraid of feeling unsafe. Over time, your nervous system learns a simple association: paycheck equals calm, no paycheck equals danger. That association doesn't form consciously, it forms through repetition. Every month you endure discomfort, and every month the paycheck arrives and relieves it, the pattern strengthens. The paycheck becomes the emotional reset button that allows you to tolerate your situation without changing it. This is why people say things like, I'll feel better once I get paid. Let's wait until next month. Once things stabilize, I'll decide. Those statements sound practical, but emotionally, they reveal something deeper. Your sense of safety has been outsourced. So when frustration builds, you don't ask, how do I become less dependent? You ask, how do I calm this feeling? And the fastest answer is always the same: more certainty, more stability, more income. This is why people respond to pressure by chasing raises, promotions, and bonuses, not autonomy. A higher salary doesn't change the structure, but it soothes the nervous system. It reduces anxiety just enough to keep you going, and the system rewards this perfectly. You become more relied upon, more embedded, more essential, which makes emotional dependence even stronger. Because now, leaving doesn't just threaten money, it threatens the thing that keeps you emotionally regulated. Over time, this changes how you make decisions. You stop asking, what do I want long term? And start asking, what keeps me from feeling anxious right now? This is how paycheck dependency stops being circumstantial and becomes psychological. Your sense of I'm okay becomes conditional. As long as money arrives on time, you feel stable. When it doesn't, fear rises. And as long as the paycheck is what keeps you calm, freedom will always feel irresponsible, even when it's necessary. That's the third lock. Not fear, not weakness, but emotional safety quietly tied to certainty. Psychology number 4. Your identity becomes attached to staying where you are. Here's a truth most people never notice until it's too late. At some point, staying on a paycheck stops being a situation. It becomes part of who you believe you are. You don't just have a job. You're a certain kind of person. Responsible, stable, reliable, practical, not reckless. These words don't sound limiting. They sound admirable. And that's exactly why this lock is so powerful. Psychology shows that humans will protect their identity even when it harms them. You feel it every time you imagine doing something different. When the thought of change appears, it doesn't feel like a new option. It feels like a violation. That's not me. I'm not that kind of person. I'm not built for that. I'm just more realistic. You're not evaluating the opportunity, you're defending your identity. Over time, your income, your routines, and your role fuse together into a story about who you are. The paycheck becomes proof that you're doing life correctly. It validates your choices. It reassures you that you didn't mess up. Walking away from that doesn't feel like moving forward. It feels like becoming someone else. And becoming someone else is terrifying, not because it's impossible, but because it threatens coherence. You start asking, if I'm not this, then who am I? If this wasn't the right path, then what were all those years for? Those questions don't feel empowering, they feel destabilizing. So instead of changing direction, you protect the identity that already exists. This is why people don't just stay in jobs, they double down on them. They accumulate titles, responsibilities, and credibility, not because those things lead to freedom, but because they reinforce the story that their choices were right. The deeper the identity, the harder it becomes to leave. A job becomes who I am. A salary becomes what I'm worth. Stability becomes my personality. And once identity locks in, logic stops mattering. You can see the pattern, you can understand the trade offs, you can even admit you're not happy. But leaving now doesn't just risk income, it risks self image. So you tell yourself, I'm just not wired for uncertainty. I value stability more than most people. I don't need more. Those statements feel true, but they're often adaptations, not traits. They're the identity your environment shaped, not the one you consciously chose. This is how people stay in lives they've outgrown. Not because they lack courage, not because they lack ideas, but because changing direction would require letting go of the person they learned to be. That's the fourth lock. Not circumstances, not money. Identity quietly defending itself against change. Psychology number 5. The need to belong quietly overrides your own logic. Here's something most people don't want to admit. Leaving the paycheck path isn't just a financial decision, it's a social one. And humans are wired deeply to belong. Long before money existed, belonging meant survival. Being accepted by the group kept you safe. Being excluded meant danger. That wiring never left, it just adapted to modern life. So when you start thinking differently about work, money, or freedom, something subtle happens. You don't just think about income, you think about people, how your friends might react, what your family might say, how uncomfortable conversations would feel, how you'd be seen if things didn't work out. And suddenly, the risk isn't just financial, it's relational. You imagine comments like, you've changed. Why can't you just be normal? Everyone has to work. Don't overthink it. Not aggressively, casually, almost jokingly. But those comments land because they signal something important. You're drifting outside the shared reality. And that's unsettling. Most people don't realize how much of their behavior is shaped by this invisible pressure. They think they're choosing stability for practical reasons, but often they're choosing it because it keeps them aligned with their environment. Same routines, same complaints, same expectations. When everyone around you lives a certain way, questioning it feels like questioning them. And humans avoid that instinctively. So even when you feel restless, even when something inside you knows this isn't it, you pull back. Not because you lack courage, but because standing alone feels heavier than staying stuck. You tell yourself, I don't want to be weird. I don't want to stand out. I don't want to make things awkward. Those sound small, but they shape entire lives. Because once you choose belonging over alignment, your logic becomes secondary. You stop asking, is this right for me? And start asking, will this make me uncomfortable socially? And paycheck dependency fits perfectly here. It's normal, it's understood, it doesn't need explanation. You can complain about it because everyone does, but leaving it, that requires justification. So people stay. They stay because it's easier to share frustration than to live differently. It's easier to be understood than to be free. It's easier to blend in than to be questioned. And over time, the desire to belong becomes a quiet ceiling, not imposed by the system, not enforced by law, maintained socially. This is why people who do leave often do it quietly, not because they're secretive, but because they know how uncomfortable visibility can be. This is the fifth lock. Not ignorance, not fear of failure, but the deep human need to remain acceptable, to stay relatable, to stay normal, even when normal is what's keeping you stuck. Chapter 6: How to Get Out Psychologically. If you've listened this far, you already understand something most people miss. Paycheck dependency is not just financial, it's psychological wiring, which means the exit isn't a dramatic leap, it's a slow rewiring process. Because the thing keeping you dependent isn't the job itself, it's what your nervous system learned to associate with the job: certainty, safety, identity, belonging. And if you try to escape without addressing those associations, you don't become free. You just become anxious. That's why people try something once, feel overwhelmed, then crawl back into stability and call it maturity. So let's be clear, the goal isn't to quit. The goal is to stop needing the paycheck to feel okay. That's what psychological independence actually means, and it happens through 5 shifts. 1. Stop treating certainty like a requirement. Most people don't need more courage. They need a new relationship with uncertainty. Right now, you are living like certainty is the entry ticket to action. You tell yourself, when I'm ready, when I'm stable, when I'm sure. But readiness isn't a feeling, it's a result of repeated exposure. Psychologically, confidence doesn't come before movement. It comes after your brain collects evidence that you won't die when things are unclear. So the first shift is not be bold. It's practice small uncertainty on purpose, not chaos, not gambling your future. Small controlled discomfort that proves you can function without guarantees. Because if your nervous system requires certainty, you will always choose salary. 2. Decouple your identity from being responsible. This is the trap of good people. You've been taught that responsibility equals stability, that a stable job means you're mature, that risk means you're reckless. So staying becomes moral, leaving becomes selfish. But the truth is, responsibility is not staying. Responsibility is choosing a life you can respect. You need to notice when your responsibility is actually just protection of your image, being seen as normal, safe, reliable. Because as long as your identity depends on being that person, you will sabotage anything that requires transformation. Freedom requires a new identity, not reckless, but self led. 3. Stop using money as emotional regulation. This is where most people lie to themselves. They think they want more income. What they actually want is less anxiety. So they chase salary increases because it temporarily calms them. But if your emotional baseline depends on stable deposits, your life will always be ruled by external security. That's not financial dependence, that's emotional dependence. Psychological independence begins when you learn to self regulate without income certainty. It looks like being able to feel discomfort without immediately escaping into safety, being able to sit in uncertainty without needing reassurance, being able to make decisions without needing emotional permission. If you don't build this, any attempt to leave will feel like panic, and you'll call it not for me. 4. Build optionality before you chase freedom. Most people think the escape plan is one big decision. It's not. It's optionality. Psychologically, optionality reduces fear because it gives the brain choices. It reduces perceived threat because you're not jumping from one cliff to another. Optionality can be skills that earn outside your job, relationships outside your workplace, income that isn't tied to hours, time blocks that aren't owned by your employer, and a smaller lifestyle that reduces pressure. The brain doesn't need a perfect plan. It needs evidence that you're not trapped. That evidence comes from options. 5. Rebuild belonging around who you're becoming. This is the part nobody wants to face. If your entire social world is built around normal life, then growth will feel lonely. And if growth feels lonely, you will retreat. So you need to rebuild belonging, not by cutting everyone off, but by intentionally adding people who normalize the life you want. Because social proof shapes identity. If everyone around you treats paycheck dependence as the only reality, then your brain will treat leaving as social danger. But when you start seeing other models, people building leverage, skills, autonomy, your nervous system stops interpreting independence as isolation. You don't need everyone to understand you. You need enough environment support so your growth doesn't feel like exile. This is the real psychological exit. And once those shifts begin, the paycheck loses its power. Not because you suddenly hate your job, but because your nervous system no longer treats salary as the only way to be okay. That's when you can choose deliberately. Not impulsively, not emotionally, not reactively, deliberately. Final truth: the money mirror. You were never dependent because you were weak. You were dependent because your brain did exactly what it evolved to do, to protect you. The paycheck didn't trap you. It aligned perfectly with fear, identity, belonging, and nervous system safety. The mirror never lies. The question is, will you keep letting psychology decide your life or slowly retrain it?